Hi there. In this video, so basically this is going to be not part two, number two of the pathophysiology lecture series. And in this video, I'm not really going to focus on this topic all that much. I'm going to spend the vast majority of this talking about cellular adaptations. And the reason why I kind of changed my mind at the last second is because, most of you, the vast majority of you who are going through pathophysiology should have had some kind of basic cell biology leading into this class. If you haven't, or if you need a review, what I'll do is I will copy and paste the URL to my cell biology videos. My cell biology videos for anatomy and physiology. I kind of have a I have a playlist of them on YouTube for, like I said, as introductory topics, which are very important to know and understand. So I will provide that there in the kind of the video description area for in case, like I said, you need a review on various topics. Like I said, it's going to be important to understand the basics of the cell membrane. The cell membrane, the cytoplasm, the organelles, basic functions of all those, and so on. So make sure, I'm not saying that you're not going to understand what I'm talking about in this video and here on out, but it'll, again, give you a deeper appreciation for what we're talking about, especially in the next two videos that come when we talk about basically cell injuries and cell death. So, like I said, I'm really not gonna talk much about this. I'm gonna pretty much be spending, this video talking about the various forms of cellular adaptations to stress, whether they're pathological or normal conditions, and like I said, provide some examples along the way as I go. So on that note, let's just jump into it. So basically, these are the forms of cellular changes that the tissues undergo. Now remember, you have to remember, there's a reason why you learn about, whether it's, like I said, in anatomy, your basic cell biology, you learn about that hierarchy of complexity, or how we're designed, from atoms to molecules to macromolecules to cells to tissues to organs to organ systems to organism. All right. Yes, I'm sure these dots are really going to help. But you have to remember that that our organs are composed of tissues. All right, and our tissues are composed of cells. All right, and remember that pathology and pathology is really about identifying tissues, cellular changes, and relating them to disease, and within tissues, and then pathophysiology is about gaining an understanding of the mechanics of these cellular changes that cause these diseases. All right, but you have to remember this basic structure here that our organs are made of tissues and our tissues are made of cells. So whatever affects our cells is going to affect the tissues and is going to affect the organs. Like I said, whether it's good or bad. All right, so that's something you have to keep in mind. And basically, we're going to talk about atrophy. We're going to differentiate between hypertrophy and hyperplasia, and then talk about metaplasia and dysplasia. Now, I guarantee you've probably heard of some of these terms already, or probably have even lived them yourself. Especially this one here. This is a very common term that you hear a lot of, whether you're in medicine or not. Atrophy. All right, just because a lot of people break their bones or get injured, or you've seen it all the time. All right. So basically, when you see so let's talk about atrophy first. So atrophy, basically, when you think of atrophy, this is when tissues shrink in size. All right, and they do so either by their cells, a decrease in cell size, so the cells of the tissue actually get smaller, or a decrease in cell number, or it could be both. I mean, it depends on the type of tissue, the type of situation, and so on. All right. So atrophy is the shrinking or the wasting away of tissues. All right, and either due to a decrease in cell size and cell number. Now, I know this sounds tedious to be getting this specific, but you're going to see why in a second. That we do need to differentiate between tissue growth and cell size and cell number. Now, atrophy isn't always pathologic. It's a normal part of life. All right, as we grow and we age, as we age, as we move through life, our tissues are going to slowly start to atrophy, and tissues that where it's really noticeable where atrophy occurs are going to be the brain, kidneys, all right, and the heart. All right, the brain, the kidneys, and the heart. Kidneys. All right. Now, one thing that these organs really have in common is that the main functional cells that make up, functional units of these tissues, they don't undergo mitosis. The neurons, the nephrons, and then the cardiac myocytes. All right. You don't regenerate nephrons in kidneys. You don't regenerate regenerate neurons in the brain, and you don't regenerate cardiac muscle tissue. But as you know, anything that is organic, cells are no exemption from that. Anything that organic has a shelf life. Anything that is organic is going to naturally break down over time, especially something like cells that are constantly stressed on a day-to-day basis. All right, then remember, when we say organic, that means something that contains carbon, not the rip-off section of the grocery store. All right, so anything that is organic contains carbon. All right. So naturally, these organs are going to shrink. So the brain is going to get smaller in size as we get older. All right. And once we get to about, I think it's like age 40 or 50, we lose about 10% of our nephrons per decade. All right, which is going to cause your kidneys to slowly atrophy. The beauty of kidneys, though, is that they're incredibly adaptable organs. So I mean, it takes a lot of loss before you really notice the effects with the kidneys. All right. Same thing with the heart. Muscle cells are going to slowly die in the heart. All right, so you get the picture here. But like, for example, if we think of a disease like Alzheimer's disease, which is a form of dementia, pathologically that disease causes degenerative changes in the brain. All right, especially it causes wasting away the cerebral cortex of the brain. All right, so as a result, that is going to cause the brain to atrophy at a much more rapid rate. All right. If you have a heart attack, if you have a massive heart attack, all right, and a bunch of cardiac muscle tissue dies, well, guess what? I mean, that's that tissue's that tissue is going to be replaced with scar tissue, but it's not the same. It's not cardiac muscle tissue, so the functional tissue in the heart actually shrank in size. All right, same thing with the kidneys. If you have a kidney disorder and nephrons are destroyed, the amount of functional units in that kidney has gone down. All right, so the wasting away or shrinkage of a tissue. All right. Now, atrophy can occur, as well, because of neurological complications, disuse, malnourishment. All right, if an organ or a tissue doesn't get enough nutrients delivered to it, that's going to cause it to reduce and shrink in size. All right, whether it's due to a lack of blood flow, actually malnourishment itself, that would more than likely be the situation here. This is a picture of a recovered POW. I found this picture. I think it's I don't know. I didn't see what war this POW that was recovered from, but thank goodness they were recovered, obviously. But the atrophy here is very noticeable. All right, so a person who is malnourished, whether it's in this situation like a prisoner of war here, someone who has a severe GI disorder and you have a hard time absorbing nutrients, or a chronic cancer patient, or not chronic, a terminal cancer patient, who is very basically emaciated or wasted away. The proper term for that is cachexia. When we say someone is wasting away. That's an example of malnourishment. All right, there's a chance that there's probably some disuses here as well. I mean, you don't need me to sit here and tell you that your if you don't use your muscles, they're going to shrink. All right, if you don't use your muscles, they're going to shrink. All right, I mean, if you've ever broken a bone and had a cast, or me, I've been through 2 knee surgeries, and the first time around, especially, I had my leg immobilized for close to a month. Right, they had a little bit of range of motion and movement, but we were kind of taking our time getting out of that. I mean, there was noticeable atrophy, in the muscle tissue and in my leg. All right, I should say my thigh and my leg, but so it doesn't take very long. All right, if you see a patient who has had I've worked with patients who've had traumatic brain injuries before. I used to be a caregiver for them for a while when I was in grad school, and and some of my patients or residents would probably be a better word to describe them. Some of my residents were, spend most of their time in bed. All right, and obviously that's going to cause noticeable atrophy of the muscle tissue because you're just not going to use it. All right, and your body's not going to waste energy essentially maintaining organs or tissues that you're not going to use. Now, when you look in a situation like this as well, with the naked eye, the noticeable atrophy is going to be with the muscles and the bones. All right, because you have to remember, if muscles are going to atrophy, bones are going to as well. All right. And what you can't see here is that the internal organs have also atrophied as well. Obviously, you can't see that, but it's going to be this is obviously more a person who's experienced just overall just general malnutrition due to obviously the harsh living conditions of being a POW, and and what was I going to say? And obviously, it's going to cause basically overall atrophy of the entire self. All right. Is this recoverable? Yeah, I mean, you get the person, obviously you re-nourish the person, pump them full of calories. Now, is it 100% reversible? I mean, if it's severe damage and wasting of the muscles, typically it's not going to be 100% recovered from that. But I mean, that tissue will, pretty much return to normal for the most part. So this is an example over here of neurogenic atrophy. Neuro meaning nerve, genic meaning originating from. So basically what we're saying here is that this is muscle atrophy caused by a neurological issue. Because remember, muscle cells are heavily, especially skeletal muscle cells, are heavily innervated by very large motor neurons. All right, and if someone has a neurological disease like multiple sclerosis, ALS, spinal cord trauma, severely like a chronic herniated disc. All right, someone sustained a physical injury to a nerve, like a gunshot victim, in a bullet or a pellet, hit a nerve and damaged it. All right, what's going to happen is due to the lack of neural stimulation of these muscles, they're just going to waste away. All right, because you can see here in this image, this is what normal fascicles or bundles of muscle cells look like, and then this is obviously muscle tissue that's wasting away. All right, so you get the picture here that the tissues can either shrink due to a reduction in size and or a reduction in number. All right, and atrophy can either be natural or pathologic. Or another example. Let's give one more example before we move on. Let's talk about menopause. All right, menopause. Yeah, again, pardon my horrendous handwriting, people. I'm still trying to get used to this new device I'm using. I'm using one of those bamboo thingamajiggers, those tablets. But it's really cool, but I'm just horrible with this stuff. So, but with menopause, basically with menopause, this is a point in time in life in females. I mean, males kind of go through their own form of menopause, but it's physiologically, it's more psychological than physiological. But with females, with females, it's a lot more strong due to the plummeting of estrogen. All right, so then as a result, that's going to cause, for example, the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the cervix, and so on. It's going to cause those major reproductive organs to shrink in size because, estrogen is what maintains the size of those reproductive organs while the female is reproductively capable. That's even a way to say it, but you get the picture. When a female is capable of undergoing reproduction, it's due to these high amounts of estrogen. And then when menopause comes around, then that is going to cause those organs to shrink. So if you were to, whether you're scoping a female pelvis or dissecting cadavers, if you were to compare and contrast, a postmenopausal female's reproductive system versus a female of reproductive age, childbearing age, you're gonna see significant differences between the two. All right. All right, so that's atrophy. I think we've kind of given plenty of examples to that. So let's talk about hypertrophy. All right, hypertrophy is a word to describe tissue growth. Okay, tissue growth. Now, with hypertrophy, we're basically this tissue is getting larger because of an increase in the size of cells. okay? Not an increase in the number of cells, an increase in the size of cells. Now this type of growth or adaptation occurs in cells or tissues that are incapable of undergoing mitosis. All right, for example, the heart and skeletal muscle. All right, these are tissues that gave up their ability to, biologically, genetically gave up their ability to undergo mitosis. During embryonic development. All right, but that doesn't mean these cells can't grow. They just can't grow in number. But what they can do is grow in size. All right, and obviously this can, this can happen under normal conditions. You don't need me to sit here and give you a large, elaborate lecture on how weightlifting makes your muscles bigger. Obviously there's a lot of complex mechanisms behind that, but you know that. All right, you know that when you lift weights, your muscles, your skeletal muscles get larger. If you exercise, like running or cycling or even weightlifting, if you're exercising, your heart is going to get larger as well. But under normal conditions, hypertrophy is going to A, be proportional to the stress, and B, there's a certain limit as to how big these tissues can naturally grow. All right, because you have to remember that, that as we apply stress to these tissues, that is why they are growing. So basically meet the demands of the stress that they are experiencing. All right, and if we're talking skeletal muscle, this will also cause, bone mass to go up as well. All right. Now, when we, what was I going to say? Oh, the reason why, basically, like I said, this is going to be proportional to the stress that we apply to these tissues, like if it's weightlifting or running or both, depending on what you're doing. Or it doesn't always have to be, the type of going to the gym and exercising kind of stuff. if you've seen a person who's a career logger, who goes out in the woods, cuts down trees, stacks wood, someone who earns a living as a mason and spends hours a day laying block. These are people that are going to be bigger built because of their job. So it's not always, it's not always, you don't have to go to the gym to be in shape. You can just be active, spend time outside, and so on, and push yourself. All right. Or if you have a profession, you get the point. All right, but these cells are going to hypertrophy. They're not going to get too big naturally because remember, the reason why cells are so small is because we want to rapidly get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. All right, and obviously as these muscle cells and tissues get larger, we're also going to increase the amount of vessels around them. All right, but again, we're only gonna be able to do this to a certain point. That's why you kind of reach a peak or a plateau in your ability to basically become bigger and stronger. And then this is what pushes professional athletes to try to go beyond these natural limits and use performance enhancing drugs. All right, and make more money because pro athletes get paid well no matter what. All right, so. Same thing with the heart. Structurally, the heart contains sarcomeres, the same contractile proteins that skeletal muscles do. So they're gonna, the heart is gonna grow as well. But like I said, it's only gonna grow proportionally. Now, there's another factor we have to look at here with the heart is that remember the main job of the heart is to pump blood. All right, the job of the heart is to pump blood. So we can't allow this heart to get too big and too out of control because then it will eventually become an ineffective pump, which I'll elaborate more on when we get to cardiovascular complications. All right, but this is an example here of a oversized left ventricle. All right, this is an example of an oversized left ventricle. So basically, one of the causes of this would be, chronic hypertension or chronic high blood pressure. All right. All right. So someone has hypertension, whether they take care of it or not, it's gonna cause the heart, the ventricles to increase in size. Obviously, if you don't take care of yourself very well and keep that blood pressure down, this is it's going to get big, and it could get to the point to where it gets too big. All right, where it gets to where this ventricle gets too big, and it makes it, like I said, it will eventually turn it into an ineffective pump because it's going to be harder to get blood out of a larger ventricle. Excuse me, all right? Or there could be narrowing of a valve, right? Whether it's the pulmonary or the aortic valve. Typically, it's the aortic valve that you see, these more of the valvular problems within the heart, just due to the the stress of that ventricle. blood flowing out of that ventricle. But again, if you see narrowing of that valve, well, I mean, this should be just common sense. If we're trying to pump the same volume of blood through a more narrow opening, well, how's the heart going to compensate for that? It's going to pump harder. It's going to increase. It's going to work harder, and then as a result, this muscle tissue is going to dramatically increase in size and eventually turn the heart into an ineffective pump. Okay, so that's hypertrophy when cells or tissues get larger due to the cells getting larger, not due to an increase in number, just due to an increase in overall size. All right. Hyperplasia. Hyperplasia basically is when is tissue growth due to an increase in the number of cells. Okay, tissue growth due to an increase in the number of cells. All right. So obviously, this is going to occur in organs and tissues that contain cells that are capable of undergoing mitosis. All right. And like I said, this could be either pathologic or this could occur under normal conditions. Or unique conditions as well. Like, for example, compensatory hyperplasia. A good example of this is the liver. All right. Hepatocytes or liver cells are normally kind of sitting around in the G0 phase of the cell cycle. All right. Remember your gap phases. Gap 1, increase in cell size, and so on. The S phase, replication of DNA. And then your second gap phase, where the cell further increases in size, and then you undergo mitosis, and then that's basically the cell cycle. Well, basically, if a cell is in G0, it's more or less in a form of stasis. All right. So basically, liver cells are capable of dividing; they just don't unless they're forced to. All right. And an example of that would be if you are donating a section of your liver to somebody. All right. Or if you have liver damage, or from physical trauma or so on. All right. But if you remove a chunk of your liver, I mean, you can cut out over 50%. I mean, up to close to 70% of your liver and donate it, and it will regenerate itself. So the physical trauma, the physical stress of destroying and damaging these liver cells will stimulate them to divide to replace the lost ones. Because remember, one of the things that normally stops cell division, mitosis, is something called contact inhibition. All right, if there are enough cells, because remember, organs are tissues, are organized tissues that contain borders. All right, and under normal conditions, cells obey these borders. But if a couple cells die here and there, well, we need to replace them. But we're only going to divide and replace these dead cells until this tissue is full again. All right, so obviously if we remove a chunk of the liver, that's going to stimulate it to regenerate and regrow, which is kind of neat. All right, an example of hormonal hyperplasia. All right, hormonal hyperplasia would be, think of like the adjustments to pregnancy that are made. All right, the adjustments to pregnancy that are made. If we think of, like breast tissue, the uterus, and so on. So basically, a massive increase in the amount of estrogen during pregnancy is going to cause the uterus to increase in size. All right, and it's going to be a combination, actually, of both hyperplasia and hypertrophy. The cells will enlarge, and the number of cells that make up the uterus are going to enlarge as well. All right, so under hormonal conditions, all right, tissues can increase in size, and that's a normal adjustment. All right, that's not necessarily a pathological condition. That is a normal, not necessarily. It's not a pathological condition. All right. But pathologic, on the other hand, well, you can do the math here. This is hyperplasia that is, not good. And an example of that affects my particular gender is benign prostatic hyperplasia. All right, so basically or is what we like to call prostate enlargement. All right, which tends to have, a family history to it and so on. And so we think about this, basically the prostate enlarging. You have to kind of come back and remember your basic anatomy of the male urinary system. So the urinary bladder obviously is located in the pelvis, and the urethra begins in the pelvis and extends out of the pelvis, obviously via the penis. But the beginning of the urethra is in the prostate. That's why this area is called the prostatic urethra. All right, so if someone has BPH or benign prostatic hyperplasia, now remember benign, benign. This is a key word with this. All right, if we're saying that this is benign, we're saying that this is cell growth that's out of control. This tissue is enlarging, but it's not metastatic. It's not cancerous. This tissue is just, remember, benign is just a large mass of tissue. All right, but you have to remember this can become cancerous if left alone. All right. Now, what happens here is when this prostate enlarges, all right, when this prostate enlarges, well, you can see then why males are going to have the particular signs and symptoms that they have. The prostate gland, basically it's going to cause a narrowing of the urethra. And that's why, males in this situation are they're going to get very strong urges to urinate. But the problem is they're going to have difficulty voiding themselves of the urine. All right, so what happens? They could be ready to go, and they're but it can be very difficult to get for the urine to even start coming out. All right, so a delay in the elimination of urine. Also, a lot of times there could be a lot of stopping and starting, of the flow of urine during urination in this situation. Another thing that's very common with this is something called nocturia. Okay, nocturnal, nighttime, so you have to pee a lot at night just due to this bladder being constantly full. Because every time a male is trying to go to the bathroom in this situation, they're not essentially fully eliminating the urine that's in their body. All right, and there's something I was going to say about that. Huh? Forgot what I was going to say. Well, anyway. All right. So basically, you can see that like I said, you can see that's why they're gonna have constant strong urges to go to the bathroom, because they're not fully eliminating their bladders. Their bladders are gonna be full a lot. All right. And then now, if you look at let's kind of just have a basic review in the anatomy lesson here. You'll notice that the prostate gland is anterior to the rectum. Darn near killed him. All right. Can anyone remember what movie quote that was from? So there's a particular reason why that when males reach a certain age, when they get to their typically their early to mid 40s, that it's recommended that they go in and get these prostate checks, because that's typically when these prostates start to abnormally enlarge. All right, and I'm assuming this is a test that the vast majority of guys out there really don't look forward to. I know I'm not, but it's something that is important, because, like I said, I mean, especially if it's in your family history, you need to get that checked out, because this could preclude prostate cancer. And I don't know. God bless you, proctologists out there. You are bigger people than me. That's just I don't know. It's just too crappy of a career choice for my taste. I don't know why y'all do that, but like I said, bless your hearts. You are bigger people than me. I couldn't do what you do, but it is important, obviously, to have them out there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, why the epiphany people have when they say they want to specialize in the lower GI tract. But like I said, bless you. But you can see how why when they do those the infamous slapping the glove on and inserting finger when they do that test, that they do that because you can literally palpate the prostate gland and feel if it is enlarging. Okay. All right. So basically that is an example of pathological hyperplasia. BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia. And again, let's all give proctologists seriously a pat on the back and a round of applause, because like I said, they are awesome people. All right, dysplasia. Dysplasia is basically it's kind of with dysplasia, what we have here, we have kind of what's sometimes referred to as like abnormal or deranged looking cells. In a very common area where dysplasia occurs in would be the cervix. All right, be the cervix. All right, that's why females are strongly recommended to get the pap smears. All right, that's supposed to be 2 words, not 1 word. Sorry, I didn't mean to lump those together like that. But that's why females are, either recommended to get pap smears either when they become sexually active or when you reach the age of 18. All right, typically whichever one comes first. I'm not saying, and they're typically recommended to get one, once a year. All right, now I'm not saying you have to get one, but it's not a bad idea. And typically one of the most common causes of dysplasia is exposure, to constant irritants and inflammation. That's also why this can happen frequently in the respiratory system as well. From breathing, inhaling irritants all the time. All right, but but with this, basically, what you see here with these squamous cells. Squamous cells are probably the most boring cells that you can possibly look at in the human body. They're just small, flat cells. All right, there's not a whole lot going on. They're just typical epithelial cells, lining and covering cells. That's really about it. All right, so when you take a look at these, so you remove so with a pap smear, the physician goes in, removes a small sample of the cervix, and then stains the sample, and then this is what they should normally look like. These are normal looking squamous cells, just small and flat, nothing to them. They're boring. All right. But then when we think about these these dysplastic cells, or cells that are undergoing dysplasia, basically they tend to take on a fairly common appearance. They tend to be smaller in size, because you can see that this is even with this close up that makes it look bigger, it's still much smaller than these squamous cells. And they tend to take on kind of an ovoid shape, and their nucleus also tends to be ovoid as well. Remember, ovoid resembling an oval. All right, so dysplastic cells have a pretty distinct look to them. Now, if a female goes in for a pap smear and these cells turn up, that doesn't mean that she has cancer. All right, dysplastic cells when they are found does not mean that a person. It's not a cancer diagnosis. All right, this is done as for preventative purposes. All right, so if these are caught, then you have to obviously there's going to be this person is going to be monitored and looked at early on, and to try to prevent cancer from taking place. But if left alone, there's a good chance that these dysplastic cells are going to proliferate and grow and then become cancerous. All right, so that's why these screenings are done. All right, and one of the things you hear about is the human papillomavirus, the HPV. Viruses can cause cancer, but it's really not as common as. I'll say they can do it, but it's not that common. A lot of it depends on the virus and the type of tissue damage that occurs and so on. But a lot of times, like you hear about people, we're pushing women, especially younger women, to get the HPV vaccine, so they can prevent themselves from getting cervical cancer. That's kind of the scare tactic that's used. I'm not saying I don't want to dissuade anybody from doing that. But you have to remember, I think this kind of sends the wrong message out there, because we're telling people, look, go get this vaccine, everything will be okay. That's kind of we're not literally saying that, but that's kind of the hidden it's kind of the generalized version of that. And the problem with that is that it doesn't teach safe practices. If you really want to avoid something like this, teach your kids safe practices. All right. And when I say teach your kids, it's not, sex ed in school does help and it's important, but realistically, when it comes to the real education that your daughters are going to get, that's got to come from home first. All right. So if you really want your children to be safe, especially your daughters, like I said, I don't want to dissuade anyone from getting the HPV vaccine, but realistically, education comes first. All right. And the last thing that I want to, and that's my soapbox rant for this presentation, if I haven't already done one already. But the last thing I want to talk about is metaplasia. Metaplasia is basically is typically a reversible change that occurs in tissues, which is very commonly associated with. Well, goodness gracious, I'm sorry. Basically with constant exposure to irritants, and I mean the best example I can think of is smoking. Shouldn't say I can think of. This is just the most commonly talked about one. So remember that your conducting airways are lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelia. It's a mouthful, right? Epithelia. All right. And so basically we call it pseudostratified because, we've got these long columnar cells, these shorter basal cells. All right. Again, this is a part of my horrific art here, but these columnar cells, blah blah blah, shorter cells. All right, and then these are then we have a base like any other epithelial tissue. There's a basement membrane. We call it pseudostratified because it looks like it's multi-layered, but it's not. It's just that some cells are taller than the others. All right, these columnar cells are much taller than these shorter kind of basal cells that are located here. Now, the really important part with this is the cilia that's associated with the lining of your respiratory tract, your conducting airways. So the cilia and the mucus that lines it. This is a good educational moment. What's the difference between mucus and mucus? M-U-C-U-S and M-U-C-O-U-S. M-U-C-O-U-S is more of an adjective, and you're using it to describe, it's typically used to describe, goodness gracious, mucous membranes, whereas this is the actual secretion. The snot, the lung nuggets that you cough up, and so on. All right. The stuff that nobody wants to see when you spit it out on the sidewalk. So please spit it in the grass, people. But when you take a look at this, what happens here when someone smokes, especially I'm not saying that if you just breathe in some secondhand smoke or if you have a cigarette, a smoke once in a while. I'm talking like chronic smokers. All right, what happens is this cilia is going to shut down. All right, the cilia is going to shut down. All right, and then what's going to happen here is when the cilia more or less kind of becomes paralyzed and non-functional, what you have here is this tissue essentially reverts. All right, this epithelial tissue is going to revert from the pseudostratified, columnar to more of a stratified, kind of a squamous type cell, kind of flattened, non-functional cells. But like I said, this is a reversible condition. Now, obviously, this isn't a good scenario here because whether it's smoking or not, we are breathing in air, so that's the inside of our body is exposed to all the junk in the air that we breathe in all the time, right? So we need the mucus, so we need these mucus secretions to trap and filter air that we breathe in, and we need the cilia to propel the mucus out. All right. So basically, that's why chronic smokers, people who've been smoking for a few decades, are going to eventually they're going to get sick more often. I don't know if you've noticed that, if you know anybody that's like that, but they're going to get sick much more often because what's going to happen is you're going to have all this this mucus is going to just kind of accumulate in the lungs, and you're going to breathe in pathogens and irritants, and you're not going to be able to really filter them out due to the non-functional cilia. And then remember, mucus is just mucin. It's supposed to be an N, sorry. Mucin plus water. So basically, it's a protein and water mixed together. All right, so what you get here is this is a great food source for organisms to grow. I used to take care of one of my residents was a combination quadriplegic and had cerebral palsy, and also smoked. Obviously, you have to remember, patients have rights, residents have rights, they can make their own choices. It's our job to educate them, but if they want to do that, I mean, you can't stop them. I mean, this isn't, it's like I said, patients have rights. And I understand why. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I understand because, that was one of the last things that resident had control over, that particular vice, and wanted to do that. But at the end of the day, when this individual didn't smoke for a while, the mucus that was coughed up was the same color as the lettering that you see here. And then no matter how much we tried to tell that person that, look, this isn't good for you, here's what's going to happen, didn't listen, and wound up getting pneumonia. Survived it, came out all right, but wound up getting pneumonia eventually. So obviously, what's going to reverse this? We'll remove the irritant, right? In this situation, obviously you need to cease smoking, and it'll take month, couple months for these, depending on how long you were smoking for these cilia to wake up, and for mucus secretions to get back up to normal and get this mucus out of there, and have that horrific coughing for a little while, and then physiologically, you're pretty much clear to smoking, physiologically, within a month to 2 months. It's the psychological aspect of smoking that's an outright challenge to try to kick, and that's what gives people such a hard time. All right. So that is my talk on cellular adaptations and cellular changes. Obviously these are the citations that I used. The next video will be talking about injurious agents to cells, and then following will be cell death.